Hi, Karen Curry Parker here. Welcome to this week's Quantum Alignment Show. And in this show, we're going to be talking about the creative potential of emotions. And as we talk about this, I want to talk about this because as we go through the eclipse energy, the Saturn and Pluto conjunction, the bumpy celestial weather that we are facing at the start of 2020, being connected to source, being connected to a place of emotional stability, and knowing how to anchor your baseline emotional frequency is a skill set that's going to support you in not only staying grounded and centered and powerfully creative yourself. It's actually an energy that you will expand on and impact others with as well. So your own emotional alignment is vital to creating stability during times of massive change. Now, as we go through this, one of the things that we're going to work on and focus on is redefining emotional energy. What is emotional energy? And why is it so important at this time on the planet? And what you can do, depending on whether you're defined or open, to really stabilize your emotional creativity so that you become deliberate in your life instead of reactive. Because this is such an important skill set, as I go through this information, I want you to know that I'm going to be very basic and simple in my approach, because I know some of you are new to human design. If you are not new to human design, if you're a super wise, all-knowing human design person, hang on, because we're going to talk about emotional energy in a way that perhaps you have not heard anybody talk about in the context of human design before too. So there's going to be something here for all of you. So for those of you who are new to human design, this is what is called the body graph. This is the map or the chart that's generated based on your birthday, birth time, and birthplace. If you have never seen a human design chart, or you've never seen your human design chart, you can get a copy of your free human design chart at our website, freehumandesignchart.com. When you go to that site, you'll get a copy of your chart, and you'll get a free report that's going to tell you all about your chart, as well as a series of articles that help you really understand the true nature of your human design type. For all intents and purposes, in today's show, we're going to be talking about energy centers, and in particular, we're going to be talking about the emotional solar plexus. So when you look at the chart, you'll see that the chart has 9 geometric shapes on it. Each of one of these geometric shapes represents an energy center that is responsible for processing specific kinds of human energies or specific human archetypes. There are 7 energy centers. They correlate directly to the 7 chakras in the Hindu chakra system. So when we say human design is a synthesis of Eastern and Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Hindu chakra system, the Judaic Kabbalah, and quantum physics, this is the part where the chakra system comes in. In the late 1780s, we split from being a 7-centered being to being a 9-centered being, which really actually sets the stage for what we're going through right now, this shift that we're going through, because what we're moving towards is actually a change in the way in which the human energy system works. And part of the importance of understanding the emotional solar plexus is that the way in which we create is changing, and the emotional solar plexus and the creative energy and the potential of the creative power of the emotional solar plexus is a key element in going from being materialistic beings, meaning people who create by sheer effort and will and force and physicality, to people who create on a quantum level, which is what we're moving towards, which means we'll still be doing the work of the world. We'll still have to move the mud, so to speak, with our bodies. But being emotionally aligned becomes the lodestone for amplifying our human creative potential, and that understanding the nature of the creative power of our emotional energy as we evolve, as the body graph itself changes its structure, is key to being on the leading edge of human evolution and ultimately being a leader in the new world, which all of you are, which is why you're drawn to this information in the first place. So when we look at this, we see that the biggest difference between the 7 centers and the 9 centers is that the heart chakra splits into the 2 centers, the G center and the will center. and the third chakra, the power chakra, the solar plexus chakra, splits into the splenic center and the emotional solar plexus. The splenic center being more instinctual and reactive, the emotional solar plexus giving us the capacity to be deliberate, which is what we're talking about today. When you look at your chart, you'll see that on the chart there are things that are colored in and open. In terms of vocabulary, anything that's colored in is what we call defined. Anything that is white is what we call undefined or open, and you might hear me flip back and forth between both of those phrases. Your defined energies are energies that you have consistent and fixed access to. This is your authentic self. These are fixed life themes that you're going to be experiencing over the course of your life. And this is energy that you ultimately radiate out into the world. This is energy that people feel from you. Anything that's in your chart that is white, we call it open. That is where you take energy and information in. And you don't just take it in, you amplify it. This is how you know others. Your openness is a place where you learn about other people's feelings, other people's energies, other people's identities. Your openness is kind of like a big giant basket. And as you go out into the world and you encounter the energies that you have open, which are the energies you're going to be receiving from others, you're collecting in this giant basket of your openness all the different ways that these archetypes, these energies can be expressed. And as your basket becomes full of different potentials as you mature and experience life, you start to understand that these energies have a lot of different ways they can be expressed. And because you have openness here, you can choose how you want to use these archetypes. Now, you can't sustain these energies. This is something that's really important to understand. Anything that you have open, you can't sustain it. You might be able to hold on to it infinitely, but you can borrow it and use it in short-term situations. And because, again, you have this huge understanding of these energies based on your experience of the varieties of different ways these open energies can be experienced in your life from your experiences of others, it gives you choice. You get to choose in your openness how you want to use these energies. The real important thing I want you to understand, two things. Number one, we all have all of the chart. It's not that you don't have elements in the chart. I hear people say this a lot. Well, I don't have this and I don't have that in my chart. You have it. We all have it all. The difference is, do you have it colored in, defined, or open? The definition means you have a consistent life theme. The openness means you have variability and inconsistency in how you're going to experience it. But you have all of it. So this chart is not only, obviously you have your own individual unique chart, which tells you all about your life themes and what's on your soul curriculum, but this chart is also the blueprint for the human experience, the human story, the human condition, and it illuminates for us the human potential. When we talk about this today, for all intents and purposes, we're going to be talking about the emotional solar plexus, and we're going to be looking at it both through the lens of what does it look like when it's defined, because it's a very important center to understand when it's defined, and what does it look like when it is undefined. How does that function as well? Now, before I even talk about this slide, I want to really clarify something. And I'm going to push this point a couple of times throughout the session today. Emotions are not about caring and love and even grief and loss from the loss of love. Okay, those energies, those primal human connecting energies that ultimately ensure our survival, right? If you're a child and you're not loved, it actually impacts your optimal neurological development. Those energies are inherent in all of us. And I think sometimes when we do human design readings and we talk about the emotional center, we think of it as these like passionate love, sex, caring energies. And there's a certain amount of that in there. But those energies are universal to everyone, regardless of their design. And if your solar plexus is defined, it means you have a fixed way of processing emotional creativity. And if it's open, it means you have variability in how you process emotional creativity. But you are not Spock if you have the center open. Okay, you are not some purely logical, rational being that has no emotions. No one has no emotions. We all have emotions because we all have an emotional solar plexus. So let's get really clear on that, because there's a kind of interesting mythology in traditional human design that sort of implies that if you have an open solar plexus, you don't have any feelings. That's not true. You do have feelings, and you can actually have very, very intense feelings and very, very explosive and passionate feelings, because you're feeling it all amplified and learning how to navigate through the flow of other people's emotional energies. And of course, mix it in with your own conditioning. Nobody is emotionless. Okay, nobody. And part of the problem is we don't understand the power of emotional energy. We misinterpret it as caring and love and all that other stuff, frustration, anger, the emotional themes, which are not located in the solar plexus of the types, which I don't even consider them to be emotional themes. Those are the emotional themes of the type when you are experiencing the anger of the manifestor, or the anger and the frustration of the manifesting generator, or the frustration of the generator, or the bitterness of the projector, or the disappointment of the reflector. Those are not emotional themes. Those are indicators of where you are in your creative process. And they are signals to us, depending on our type, that tell us how aligned or misaligned are we with our energy and our power. So emotional theme is maybe not even the right word to use for types. That maybe these are creation barometers, which makes it actually that's a good way of saying that. Maybe I'll say that from now on. All right, when we look at the physiology of the solar plexus center, we see that physiologically it's the center for digestion, assimilation. It's the place where we have the energy for the pancreas, the kidneys, and because it has a quality of intensity that can be experienced as melancholy, and when we ask the wrong questions, such as what's wrong with me, it can spin that melancholy out into depression. And I don't want to talk about this in the context of clinical depression. I'll say as a healthcare practitioner and an integrative health specialist, depression as a diagnosis is a real thing. And it is often not at all associated with the emotional solar plexus, and very often associated with unresolved trauma and other factors. So I really almost want to take depression off of this list. It's put here in human design associated with the solar plexus center. Really, I would say the depression that can sometimes get kicked up in the solar plexus center comes from misunderstanding your emotional energy and misunderstanding the power of focus, which we'll talk about later. But true clinical depression is not necessarily associated with the solar plexus center and can have a lot of other places where it gets located. And I want to make sure that when we're talking about this, we're talking about long-term cycles of feeling bad, but not clinical depression. That's a whole other can of worms that we're not going to go into today. So we have to go back and look at the creative process when we start to look at the emotional solar plexus as a source of our creative power. The way in which I want to break this down in the context of human design is to sort of look at the physiology and the quantum physics of the creative process. And I'm going to keep it super simple because I think I've been belaboring this point on the Quantum Alignment Show a lot lately. And certainly if you want to learn more about the creative process, just go to the video section on the Facebook page to the left. There are a bunch of videos there about the creative process, or if you're watching on YouTube, just go through all the videos we have here. There's a ton of videos that really flesh out the creative process. But in the name of keeping it simple, your thoughts calibrate your emotions, which calibrate your heart. So if we're going to look at that mechanistically in the context of the chart, we see that your thoughts create your emotional energy, which in turn calibrates your heart. Your emotional frequency calibrates your creative capacity, and the role of the solar plexus ultimately is to synchronize the electromagnetic attraction field in the heart. And it is also an awareness center. It tells us when we are aligned or not, if something feels right or it doesn't. This is where that phrase we use is that something doesn't feel right. It feels off. Part of that awareness is coming from your emotional solar plexus. You can sense when the energies aren't in sync, when something's off, right? In your heart, let's go back to this slide. In your heart center, the G center and the will, but located specifically in the G center, is a magnetic monopole, an attractive force. That magnetic monopole contains the code for what your soul and your life needs to manifest your life purpose. There are certain things that it's going to attract into your life experience that are part of your destiny, like a soulmate, for example. When you land into a situation where you're getting close to meeting your soulmate, your magnetic monopole is pulling that experience into your reality. But there's a lot of variability here too with this magnet in our heart. We can calibrate this magnet based on the quality of the frequency of our emotional energy. So when you have good thoughts, when you think a thought, that thought creates a photon storm, a storm of light in your brain. That photon storm is going to then in turn trigger neurotransmitter production. Those neurotransmitters then stimulate a specific emotional frequency that matches the quality of the thought you just had. That emotional frequency in turn calibrates the magnet in your heart, the electromagnetic resonance field of your heart, and that in turn is going to influence what you notice, what you see, what you pay attention to, and ultimately what you attract into your physical reality. So the emotional solar plexus plays a vital role in the law of attraction. It's the calibrator. It's part of the calibrator of what you attract into your life. When we look at the emotional solar plexus, we see that instead of the emotions that we traditionally associate with the word emotions in the solar plexus, we have here in this profoundly creative center the potential to have the energy for sexuality as well as for sustainability, for community, for creative passion, for experience that ultimately leads to pattern breaking and miracles, for genuine intimacy and connection, and again, sustainability, for abundance and a deep spiritual connection to source, and the potential for, with right alignment, alchemy and creativity. There's so much juice here that is natural and part of the human experience that really defines the solar plexus as a very uniquely human thing. And I really want to clarify this, because sometimes when I say mammals and animals don't have a solar plexus, and by design they don't, okay, they don't have an emotional solar plexus, people get upset with me. I get upset. I have dogs. My dogs have big feelings. They care deeply. When I'm not here, they miss me and I miss them. You know, when we go away for a trip and they stay with the dog sitter, they get depressed. I have one dog that used to emotionally eat when I would leave for a trip. That's caring. That's love. That's located somewhere else. That's located in the G and in the sacral. We all the mammals have those energies. So I'm not saying that animals are emotionless, okay? I am saying, though, that the capacity for an animal to build community, to engage in conscious sexuality, to work sustainably, to be able to provide for their tribe, to have intimacy and emotional intimacy and abundance and a connection to source, alchemy, creativity in the way that a human does is a little bit different. Yes, I think when we start to look at how does an animal care for its young, that's in there as well. But that's caring, that's sacral energy. That's different than this emotional piece. This is the energy that creates music and poetry and all those things that are so innately human that set us apart to a certain degree from the animal world. And in fact, what we see as this system, our energy system, evolves is that we make more of a break as we go through the shift from the animal kingdom. What that means is that we're in the process of cultivating a very different relationship with animals and nature. One that doesn't have us as dependent on them, meaning we're moving from needing to eat animals, for example, to stay grounded, That energy is changing, and our relationship with nature and natural order is shifting. And for us to become more sustainable in the world, we actually are elevating this relationship with nature and animals to a different level, because we need to stay in alignment with natural order as we evolve. And so these more base needs to eat meat, for example, are shifting and changing. And this isn't, by the way, a statement on any of you who are doing keto or anything like that. This isn't personal. This is a generalized human shift, not a personal shift. And if you're eating meat, that doesn't mean you're not evolved. So it means that the world itself is changing, and our relationship with the natural world and the animals is changing. When you have a defined solar plexus, it has a couple of things we need to pay attention to. First of all, a defined solar plexus, that's going to be half of you. It needs to wait for clarity. And when I say wait for clarity, this is really important to understand, because the base of understanding the emotional energy center, whether it's open or defined, is that it's a center that gets calibrated over time. Okay, it gets calibrated over time. That's so important for us, because how many times in the traditional teachings of deliberate creation do we beat ourselves up because all of a sudden now we've had a dark thought or a bad feeling or a bad day or a bad week? You know, if you think about what do you say about people or think about people or feel about people when you're on the highway, you know, I want us all to be so grateful that it takes time to create emotional alignment, because if we were creating instantly in the moment, you know, it would be pretty messy on this planet, or messier, okay? So there's time built into this, and time, that purpose of that time is to create alignment, which we're going to talk about. The defined solar plexus has innate waves. If you have a defined solar plexus, you have innate emotional waves of energy that are really about internal and external alignment. You have lower ends of the frequency waves that are perceived or experienced oftentimes as melancholic. Those lower ends of that emotional spectrum is about being internally aligned or working to get yourself internally aligned. So there's an internal creative process for anybody who has a defined solar plexus that involves the need to be with your melancholy, to hear it, to feel it, to experience it, to be present, to even enjoy it. You know, my husband has an individual emotional wave, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and he's an architect and an urban designer. And when he's low on his emotional wave, when he's experiencing those inner creative cycles of his wave, you know, he will stay up all night and draw. You know, he likes to be alone, and he likes to listen to the news, which depresses the heck out of me, but he likes kind of the low part of the news. Or he'll listen to blues music, which, you know, I also don't really like it, but he loves, and he'll listen to the blues and draw. And that's kind of his internal creative process. He can't really talk about what he's doing. He can't really talk about where he's at. He's just inside of himself, sort of being with his emotional energy. When he goes up on his wave, and everyone with defined solar plexus has highs and lows or ups and downs, when he goes up on his wave, then he's ready to share his creative insights. He's ready to share his creative productions. It's the external process of the creative cycle. So the defined solar plexus has internal and external creative cycles. There are three kinds of defined emotional solar waves. The individual wave has a tendency towards high highs and low lows. If you have either the 1222 channel defined or the 3955 or both, sometimes you can have both, defined in your chart, it means you have a tendency towards an emotional wave that has high highs and low lows. Those high highs are your outwardly expressive creative cycles. The low lows are your inward, more melancholic pieces. This is the energy that my husband has. With this, he has the 3955. His best friend has the 1222, and between the two of them, when they hang out together, they can be the most Eeyore-iest type two people on the planet, or they can be completely goofy and Tiggerish, and they kind of go back and forth in their relationship between Eeyore and Tigger. If you have what's called a collective wave, you will either have the 4130 or the 3635 defined, or both. This is an energy cycle that stretches the boundaries of the experience of being human. This is what's oftentimes called the experiential way. It is intense and juicy and, as I said, experiential. This emotional energy wave has sort of a slow jog up. You'll see the image on the right-hand side of this slide, and then a rapid plummet. So when you go down on your wave with this particular collective wave, it tends to be like the bottom just drops out. And then you start again on that slow ride up. So again, recognizing that you're not going to necessarily have the high highs and low lows, but more of a slow jog up, a peak, and then a plummet, and then a slow jog back up, a peak, and a plummet. People often ask me, well, how do I know where my wave is going to be? If I could answer that question, I would be rich. but here's what I will tell you. If you have a defined emotional solar plexus, keep a log. Start making a note of how you feel emotionally. Some of you are going to find that you have a rhythm and consistency, especially if you also have the gate 5 defined, which is the gate that comes off the top left-hand side of the sacral, which is not the square at the bottom, but the square that's kind of in the bottom middle of the chart. Some of you are going to find that you have absolutely no rhythm to your wave. And what's going to be really important for you is knowing how it makes you feel so that you can identify your wave. Because here's the thing that's important about the emotional wave. Your emotional solar plexus, when it's defined, is an authority. When you are living true to your human design energy, you want to follow your strategy for your human design type. And again, if you're new to human design, that's all explained to you in the report that you get when you get your free human design chart at freehumandesignchart.com. You want to follow your strategy and your authority. And if you have an emotional defined solar plexus, if this is colored in on your chart, your solar plexus is your authority. And what that really means for you is that you've got to wait for clarity over time. And what that means is that when you get something to either initiate or respond to, or an invitation or a recognition, depending on your type, the initial experience that you have with that invitation or that thing to respond to or that thing you want to initiate, your initial response to it needs to be, well, it needs to stay consistent over time. So if you get an invitation, for example, and in the minute that you get the invitation, you're like, yes, I want to do this. The tendency is, of course, to jump into it. But if you're emotionally defined, as half of you are, you don't know whether that's really the right decision for you or not, because you haven't had the gift of the clarity that you get by waiting for a little bit to see if your feelings about it stay the same over time. So if you get an invitation, you want to and you experience it in the moment as, whoa, yes, I really want to do that. If you have emotional authority, you can't take that invitation right away. You need to stay with it and feel your way through it for a couple of days or until you get an inner click. And that inner click means that you've waited long enough to know that your response to the invitation has stayed consistent over time. So if you get a yes, and then the next day you're like, no, and then the next day you're like, yeah, and the next day you're like, no, and the next day you're like, yeah, and you're all over the place with that decision, don't do it. Because what that means is that when you step into the relationship with whatever that invitation was, you're going to have that same variable experience the entire time you're involved with it. You need to have an emotional response that stays consistent over time. And if it stays consistent over time, then it's correct for you. If it's inconsistent over time, then it's not correct for you. And obviously, if the answer is no, and it stays no consistently over time, it's also not correct for you. All right. The last emotional wave is, it's called the tribal wave. The tribal wave is going to be defined by either the 4037, the 59.6, or the 1949, or any combination of those three. A lot of times people who have tribal definition in their emotional solar plexus, they don't really feel emotional energy that much. They don't have the extreme highs and lows, ups and downs. So they have movement, subtle emotional movement. If you have a tribal emotional wave, you don't usually have to wait that long for clarity. Here's the time when it does get triggered, though, and this is the time when it can be actually quite painful. If anything happens in your relationships, if you have an emotional upset in your relationship, or a breakup, or a loss, or a fight, or something's happening in your emotional relationship, or good stuff too, like you are intimate, or you fall in love, these kinds of things can really impact the tribal wave. So you might not notice your emotional wave unless you break up with someone, and then you feel it really deeply. So that relationship energy oftentimes really impacts your awareness of the emotional wave. When we look at your vibrational frequency, and don't panic, we are going to talk about the open solar plexus a little bit later on. For those of you who are like, wait, no, what about me? I'm going to get to that. Your vibrational frequency, as we shift and move, is moving us from being reactive, which is splenic based. We react out of the spleen. This is instinct, old energy. This is fear-based energy. It has a place, reactivity. You want to run from a bear if it's chasing you in the forest, or spray bear spray on it, or curl into a ball, whatever you do with a bear. Okay, you want that piece to stay intact, and it will. But we cannot be creating our lives from a place of fear. This cannot be the ruling center that dictates whether you take a leap of faith and do an initial healing session on someone using a healing modality that you've just learned, and you're feeling a little bit anxious because you don't know what your level of experience is, but you're going to try it anyway. You can't let that fear paralyze you and keep you from fulfilling your purpose. You can't let your fear of inadequacy paralyze you. You can't let your fear of the future paralyze you. You can't let your fear of the past paralyze you. All these complex fears that get mixed up with instinct in the human experience, they're getting teased out as we evolve. And we're getting more sophisticated in our ability to regulate fear and use it only as a protective, survival-based instinct reaction. And we're learning to use the power of the emotional solar plexus to create deliberately. And we've been talking about this now very actively in our collective for the last 20 years. Even the movie The Secret sort of kicked this up. Abraham Hicks has been kicking this up. All of these emerging thought leaders teaching about the power of emotions and the potential for deliberate creation. Part of the key element for deliberate creation is emotional alignment. Consciously, deliberately cultivating a high quality of emotional frequency. Emotional energy travels in waves. If you have a defined emotional solar plexus, it has a fixed wave pattern. It's going to high highs or low lows, or a slow jog up and a plummet, or small undulations. If you have an open solar plexus, you don't have fixed emotional waves. You have a variability in your emotional waves. All right? But emotional energy, the frequency of energy, like all energies, like all frequencies, travels in what's called a sine wave. All right? Hold on to that thought, because I'm going to come back to that in a minute. All right? So let's go back to looking at how do we create. Remember I said that whenever you have a thought, it triggers a photon storm. That photon storm in turn stimulates neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters in turn create an emotional response, which in turn calibrates your heart center. We want to deepen this conversation just a little bit, just so that you understand this even more fluidly. The meanings you have about things in your life, mixed in with your human design and how you experience energy and your conditioning, your past experiences, your family's belief systems, all of these things that make the story of who you think you are, create meanings around concepts, ideas, archetypes. The meanings you hold are going to influence what neurotransmitter you're producing in order to create whatever emotional response you're creating. So let's talk about this in the context of quantum physics. Quantum physicists know that you can only measure movement or location of a quantum particle, not both at the same time. Movement of quantum particles, unmanifested realities, contain potentials. When something is located or made manifest, it means the quantum particles are in a location that we're measuring, okay? It's the meanings that you hold that determine what you manifest, which is what I just talked about. So you're living in a world that is full of potential. You're you're swimming in a bath of a potential field of creativity. There are an infinite number of potentials you could be manifesting, locating, or quantum physicists say collapsing into your reality right now. The ones that you have as tangible, physical, manifested experiences in front of you right now are the potentials that you've made manifest because you have meanings associated with them. Let me flesh this out a little bit more. Consciousness is the mediator between mind and matter. What maintains the parallel function of the mind and the brain? Consciousness. Mind and meaning are therefore vital for manifesting. The meanings you hold are determined by your conditioning field. If you want to create what you want in your life, money, peace, healthy relationships, well-being, you have to ascribe a meaning to that idea that is in alignment with what you want. One more thing, when you observe something, when you pay attention to it, when you focus on it, it changes. And I'm going to bring this concept back up when we go back and look at emotional waves. So what does that mean? In the name of keeping this simple, it means our perception of the world and the meaning we have about the world determines what we create. If you want to change your reality, we have to change the meaning we ascribe to it. This is where healing happens. And I don't like to think of it as healing. I like to think of it as holing. And let me just say that in an evolving world, your ability to craft meanings that are in alignment with the higher potential of humanity right now is the lodestone of you taking leadership in creating an equitable, sustainable, and peaceful world. So let's play a game. Some of you have played this game with me before, but let's play it again. I'm going to give you a word. And the word I'm going to give you is peace. And just, if you will, take a minute and make a list right now of what does peace mean to you? And as you contemplate peace, we're all going to have different meanings around the word peace. Some of you might think, oh my God, it's impossible, especially if we have X, Y, and Z leader in charge of our country. Some of you might think, wow, what a great idea. Some of you might be able to even imagine the feeling of peace in your body. Some of you might be concerned about, what if we don't ever have peace? Or is it possible? Or can humanities really live in peace? Whatever the thoughts that you have around peace, those thoughts are creating neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters are stimulating an emotional response, which in turn is calibrating your heart, and in turn creating the experience of peace in your reality right now. It's also creating the experience of peace for the world because we're all connected to each other. And if enough of us are holding the energy frequency of peace, the highest potential expression of the human story, then we create the potential for us to manifest this in our physical reality on our planet right now. So when we look at healing the planet, holding the planet, staying stable and strong in a time of cataclysmic shift and change such as the one that we're in, we have to create meanings and clean up old meanings around the words, the ideas, the archetypes that we carry in our human experience. Okay? So if we're going to create something different in the world, or if we're going to create alignment around what we know as truth in the world, we have to make sure that the meanings that we hold are high frequency meanings that stimulate high frequency emotional energies, that stimulate our hearts to be aware and ready and attracting that experience into our realities. All right, let's go back and talk about emotional frequencies. As I said, an emotional frequency is a sine wave, as all energy frequencies are. It flows in a sine wave. When we look at a sine wave, we're looking at the number of undulations over time. That tells us a lot about the quality of the emotional energy or the frequency of the energy. When we're looking at a sine wave, we're also measuring what's called the baseline. So if you took a line, sort of ran it through the middle of the emotional frequency, you'd have the baseline frequency, which is kind of the medium point between the high and the low. So what does it mean when we talk about baseline frequencies and frequencies in general? Frequency, when we say something is high frequency or low frequency, or an energy is high frequency or low frequency, we're looking at the number of times the energy wave undulates over time. So if you look at the top image, that image is a low frequency wave. So over time, that wave only moves twice. If you look at the bottom is a high frequency wave, right? It's moving many times over time. When we look at the baseline frequency and we start to understand the nature
we see that in a low
how
frequency
this energy
wave
works.
The amount of time spent either high or low is longer. And because we're sitting there at a longer period of time, we perceive it more. It's more noticeable. It feels more strong, more consistent. So if you've got a higher frequency wave, and you see the baseline frequency, because there's a lot of movement here, when you hit the low end of the wave, you're already popping back up to the high end and the low end and the high end. And so you're not noticing the intense variability between the high and the low. Now, if you remember when we were looking at the previous slides, I said, when you notice something or when you pay attention to it or you see it and you measure it and you give it attention, it changes it, right? So it's a quantum physics principle. When you pay attention to something or you notice it or you measure it or you observe it, you begin to change its behavior. You expand on it. When you are carrying a low baseline frequency on your emotional wave, or you have a low frequency wave, and you suddenly go down on your wave, because we are so culturally conditioned towards the negative, which is a very different conversation, but there's a biological part of that as well and an evolutionary advantage to that. But we are very conditioned to notice the negative. Think about the conversations you have in your friendships. Do you ever call up your friend and go, man, I'm so happy today. I just feel so great. My life is great. Everything is great. Is that the consistent conversation you're having with the people around you or with yourself inside your head? Or are you calling your friends to talk about how crappy things are in your life right now? Or you're telling yourself that in your head? We are conditioned and we are evolutionarily hardwired to a certain degree to notice the negative. It keeps us prepared for the next terrible thing so we're ready, right? But that's changing. When you have a low frequency wave and you get to the bottom of the wave and you're noticing how bad you feel, how terrible you are, how melancholic you are, because you're looking at it, you're observing it, you're noticing it, you're focusing on it, you actually cause that part of the wave to expand and grow and cause your entire baseline frequency to come down lower and the frequency of your emotional wave to slow down even more. Where we put your energy and attention is where you get growth and results. And when you have the low end of your emotional wave, if your focus is on how crappy you feel, and noticing how crappy you feel and telling everybody else about how terrible your life is right now and how hard it is. Or, as I said in my husband's case, he mainlines NPR in his office nonstop, 24/7. He gets in my car, he turns it on in my car. I keep telling him, don't put that negative juju in my car energy, right? When you're focusing on what's not working and what doesn't feel right, that's what's expanding. And so when we talk about the nature of the defined emotional solar plexus, because built into the defined emotional solar plexus experience is the low end of the wave, you have to consciously work with that low end to find a different way of working with it that allows you to be with it. You don't want to judge it. You don't want to resist it. You don't want to hate on it. It's a part of your creative process. It's who you are. But rather than going, God, what's wrong with me? My life sucks. Everything's terrible. To instead go, I'm having an inner creative process right now. I'm going to be with my creativity. I'm going to be with my melancholy. I'm going to be with my inner process here and explore the inner terrain of my emotional awareness with the understanding that I'm going to feel better. Things are going to shift. I'm going to have the outward creative process soon, and it's going to feel different. So keep your energy focused up, not down. Because when you do that, you actually increase the frequency of your wave, you increase the speed at which you go from the low to the high, and you lift the quality of your baseline frequency. And remember that baseline frequency happens over time. So it's not about failing in the moment or having a bad day or thinking, I screwed up because I had a dark thought. Let that go. It's about clarity and alignment over time. In fact, I don't even want to say clarity over time anymore. I want to just say alignment over time. So it's not the in-the-moment response. It's the baseline that you sustain over time that influences the quality of emotional energy that you have, and ultimately it's the baseline over time that's calibrating your heart. A couple of other things to know about the defined solar plexus. The defined solar plexus, when you are learning something, you have to go through your whole emotional wave before you really get it. That means sometimes when it comes to memory, you won't remember things until you've gone through your whole wave as you're learning. So it takes you time to learn and to understand, and that's okay. It's not stupidity, it's emotional alignment. It needs time for lots of kinds of clarity. As I said, when you have a defined solar plexus, it is part of your strategy, meaning you've got to make sure that if you are emotionally defined, and your authority obviously is going to be your emotional solar plexus, you want to make sure that you're staying consistent with your emotional response over time before you actually accept whatever is coming your way. And because this is an energy center, it's a motor. If you don't follow your emotional energy and consciously work with it and give it the opportunity to take the time that it needs, you will burn yourself out. There's burnout here. And you can burn out on your own emotional intensity and the misuse of your emotional energy. All right, the open solar plexus. When you have an open solar plexus, you are empathic, emotionally empathic. There are other places where empathy appears in the chart, so please be aware that if you're defined solar plexus and you're feeling empathy, it doesn't mean you're not empathic. It's just this is emotional empathy. When you are emotionally empathetic or open, you feel other people's emotional energies. And because most of us were not raised with human design, we take them in and we think that they're ours. We feel them as our own. And when we feel them as our own, we mistakenly think that they belong to us and we act on them or react on them. When you have an open solar plexus, there's a tendency to avoid truth and conflict because you don't want to make anybody mad because it hurts so badly because you feel it so deeply. So oftentimes people with an open solar plexus have a strategy of being nice in the world because you don't want to make a wave with anybody else. And sometimes you can be addicted to drama when you have this energy as well. A big piece to remember when you have an open solar plexus is that you, just like the person with a defined solar plexus, have to work to consciously hold your emotional frequency. You might not have the same variability and the same wave-like pattern in your emotional energy. It'll be a little bit easier for you to maintain a consistent emotional response, provided that you are recognizing your own energy and not taking in and reacting to somebody else's. And that's important because a lot of times when we have an open solar plexus, we've been so deeply entrained by other people's emotional energies, it's very hard for us to tease out our own openness. We buy into the intensity and the juice of the emotional solar plexus energy of others, and we ride it and we borrow it and we let ourselves go up and down with it, especially when we are empathic. When you feel the pain of the world, it's easy when you have an open solar plexus to feel despairing about it. So again, same thing applies to you as it does to the defined solar plexus. You've got to consciously work to maintain meanings in your reality and a practice on a daily basis of staying emotionally aligned with the truth of the higher order archetypes of the human story. And the truth of the higher order archetypes of the human story says this: we all come from love. We are all unified through a field of love. We are all designed to be compassionate. We are all designed to love ourselves and love each other. We are all designed to be powerful. We are all designed to be the authentic expression of who we are. We are all designed to have control over the narrative we tell about who we think we are, and we have the capacity to change that narrative on a daily basis and make it what we want it to be. We are all infinitely and divinely connected to Source, and we are all serving the unfoldment of the cosmos, which, by the way, science now shows is much more in formation than we thought. It's not entropic, it's syntropic and holistic. And we serve the unfolding of that holistic plan through our connection to Source. We are designed to love our bodies and to fully embody the power of our souls in a physical expression through our bodies. We're designed to receive everything we need to fulfill the cosmic plan working through us. And as I said before, we're designed to respond to the world with compassion. And when you have an open solar plexus, this is the truth that I want you to find a way to anchor in yourself on a daily basis. Whether it's through a consistent practice, whether it's through a practice of asking yourself what I think is the most important question when you have an open solar plexus, and that's this: is this my energy? And if it's not, be a screen. Let it flow through you. Don't be a sponge. Don't hold on to it. Don't be responsible for it. Don't stop yourself from asking for what you want because you're afraid of feeling other people's feelings. Be present to it, and then get back to a place of sustaining your own emotional baseline frequency. At this point in time on the planet, because this energy calibrates the heart of who we are personally and collectively, nothing is more important than maintaining a strong, powerful, high frequency emotional wave. If you are struggling with your solar plexus, in addition to finding a practice that allows you to stabilize your emotional frequency and help you have a high quality emotional wave, because this center is also the center for digestion and assimilation and has the potential for emotional eating and diabetes and food issues, you can also work with this energy center by staying well hydrated on a physical level. It's interesting to note that if you're not well hydrated, you're cranky. That's because your solar plexus starts misfunctioning. It's an energy center. It needs water to function well. Okay? Stay well hydrated, at least 8 glasses of water a day. Minimize the amount of sugar that you eat because this center is responsible for processing the sweetness of life. Create sweetness in your life, not in your diet. I'm not saying no ice cream, okay? I eat ice cream every Friday. It's my treat. I love ice cream. But minimize it. Make sure you're eating high quality food. And all of these things will help you improve your baseline frequency. Hydration, high quality food, minimal sugar. I'm not going to get into elaborate dietary plans because I really do believe, after studying human design for 21 years, that your inner authority, whatever that is for you, knows what's the right diet for you. And it may change depending on what's going on in your body and your world around you. And that there's no fixed system that says your design eats X amount of food or X quantity of food or X quality of food or X kinds of foods. You know what you need to eat. And if you need support in figuring that out, go to day2.com, which is a genetic assay service that will look at your genetics and tell you what foods you need to be eating based on your genetic heritage and your gut flora and what's going on in your body right now, because that's the only thing that's scientifically valid. And I don't want you to get misled into thinking there's any kind of diet per type or diet even per blood type, because none of that bears out in the lab. But what does bear out in the lab is your genetic lineage influences what you can metabolize in a healthy way with minimal inflammation. The quality of the gut flora, which by the way is influenced by the solar plexus, because the gut flora live here. This is where the gut connection in the brain, body, heart piece, the vagal nerve and the GI tract, which by the way, your GI, the flora in your gut produce 90% of the serotonin in your body. So your emotional well-being is influenced by the quality of the health of your gut flora. Get your gut flora tested if you're struggling with emotional energy, because it might be that too many courses of antibiotics or whatever has influenced the quality of the health of the gut flora in your body, and that may be influencing your emotional response. So check that out too. Sometimes there's a physiological component to this and we can't ignore it. So day2.com. Okay. Now, quick review, just to kind of sync this up. Your baseline frequency, emotional frequency, calibrates the power of your heart. And not just your heart, but the hearts of those around you. If your neighbors are happy, you're likelier to be happy. If your friends are happy, you're likelier to be happy. If your friends have happy friends, you're likelier to be happy, because well-being is contagious. The more well-being we embody and live, the more we spread the frequency of well-being on the planet. And it is, I believe, one of the most important things we can do right now. Get yourself in alignment so you can create more for others. According to an extensive 2-decade-long study conducted by researchers at the University of California, San Diego, happiness is not only contagious, online communities can even magnify the intensity of global emotional synchrony. So as we gather here today for the show, we are intensifying our emotional quality of energy and creating a greater quality of happiness on the planet. Of course, research shows that negativity is also contagious, so be mindful. Try to minimize your stinking thinking. Higher frequencies of energies can penetrate lower frequencies of energies. Lower frequencies of energies cannot penetrate higher frequencies of energies unless we allow them to. So be conscious of the energy around you. According to Viktor Frankl, who was able to maintain a state of happiness under the worst conditions possible as a Holocaust survivor, as a Holocaust prisoner, he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Do the world a favor, as well as yourself, and consciously and deliberately cultivate a high frequency of emotional energy. When you do, you create a state of global coherence. Not only is your heart existing in a state of well-being, but you amplify the frequency of heart in the world, and I believe that the world needs that more than anything in the world right now." Just a quick note at the end of the show today, I have published the brand new Human Design Evolution Guide. This is a guide that goes through the solar transits and the lunar declinations of the year. It gives you the brand new human design, quantum human design language for all of the gates, with each movement of the sun through all of the 64 quantum human design gates. You get information about the gate, writing exercises, explanations about the gates, and how to use these energies consciously, these celestial energies consciously, to deliberately craft a conscious, high-frequency response to the celestial weather. This book is going to give you the information you need to stay aware of what's going on the planet right now. What are the energies doing? How can you use these energies? How you can use these energies to consciously craft and cultivate a deliberate and conscious high-frequency emotional response. I have about 10 copies, hard copies left. I am going to be mailing them. If you're in the continental United States, I will mail them to you. You can order them here on this website, gracepointmatrix.com/2020-chapter/. If you do not live in the continental United States, go to this website anyway. You can download the first chapter for free. The 2020 Evolution Guide will be available on Amazon next week. So for those of you who are not in the continental United States, who are all over the world, or in Hawaii or Alaska, you'll be able to get your copy next week. But if you want to get your copy now and you're in the continental United States, get your copy right here, gracepointmatrix.com/2020-chapter. And you can get started today crafting a year that is worthy, a full worthy expression of the true magnificent story of who you really are. Thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate all of you, and I celebrate your adventure in expanding and raising the baseline frequency of your emotional energy, and all of us consciously creating a world of global coherence, heart-based living, compassion, equitable, sustainable peace.